Islamic terrorism. It's a phrase on everybody's mind right now. One that incites fear, anger and confusion amongst us all. And after the horrific attacks in Manchester and Westminster, it's getting closer to our way of life more than ever. We are a nation afraid of Islam, afraid of Muslim men and women, unfairly condemning them with a cover-all attitude that assumes every follower of Islam means us harm. Obviously, to the sensible-minded, that is not the case. But what is Islamic extremism? What is this sect of Islam that does mean us harm? Where does it come from, and why exactly are terrorist groups like ISIS springing up now? I couldn't answer those questions. I couldn't explain why Islam was the fuel for this horror. I couldn't tell you why these terrorist attacks were happening, nor what they were happening in the name of. So I set out to find out exactly why this is happening. Now, the first step into understanding the origins of Islamic terrorism is to gain a surface-level understanding of the religion itself. Islam is a monotheistic religion, a religion that professes to only have one God. In this case, their God is Allah. The Prophet of Islam, said to be the last messenger of God, is known as Muhammad. The holy scriptures of Islam come in the form of the Quran and the Sunnah. The Quran is considered to be the exact word of Allah, whilst the Sunnah provides the moral values and teachings of Islam, and is purportedly written in part by the Prophet Muhammad. These two bodies of text hold the core values of Islam. Now, in the practice of Islam, most Muslims go down one of two paths. They either subscribe to Sunni, which is the majority, or Shia Islam, which is the minority. The differences between these two denominations come down to a disagreement upon who Muhammad's successor should be. Now let me ask you this. You noticed any similarities yet? The Quran, the Sunnah, the Old Testament, the New Testament, the Sunni, the Shia, the Catholics, the Protestants, Allah, Muhammad, God, Jesus? The similarities to Christianity are almost uncanny. Uncanny because Islam, along with Judaism and Christianity, all stem from the same starting point. They are all something called Abrahamic religions. Religions that all find their origin in the Hebrew patriarch Abraham, claimed to be the father of all Jews and the originator of these three religions. So the man in the mosque, the church and the synagogue are all praying in the name of a religion founded in one singular instance by one singular person. And that in itself makes the whole lot of it sound like a load of fucking nonsense, doesn't it? But we'll save that one for another video. So that is a very shallow, very surface level understanding of Islam that should hopefully give you a little bit more context as to what I'm talking about. Of course, there is plenty more going on in Islam, and plenty more that I could explain, like the 5 pillars of Islam. But this isn't a fucking RE lesson. All you need to know is that Islam is very similar to other contemporary religions, all of which find their moral values in a 2,000-year-old fantasy novel.
You're a wizard, Harry.
I'm a what?
So if it is so similar to other apparently peaceful religions, then where does this extremism come from? Prominent and somewhat controversial human rights activist Ayaan Hirsi Ali believes that this violence comes from Islam itself. She explicitly states that Islam is not a religion of peace, and that its holy texts incite what she calls theologically sanctioned violence. Now I have to stress here that Ayaan Hirsi Ali does not believe that all Muslims are violent. She is simply pointing out that the Quran and the Sunnah encourage acts of violence in their texts. And she's right. If you do look into it, you will find some very troubling passages in the Quran. Prophet, make war on the unbelievers and the hypocrites. Hell shall be their home, and evil fate. But these passages and these examples of violence in the Quran are no more violent than what you will find in the Bible. Slaves, submit yourself to your masters with all respect, not only to the good and the gentle, but also to the cruel. Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains that I shall show you. Christianity even sanctioned the Crusades, a series of holy wars that lasted nearly 200 years and claimed over 1.7 million lives. All because they wanted to take away the little bit of dirt that the Muslims had. So it goes without saying, religion is fucking mental. But why these violent ideologies of Islam, that are not that far removed from Christianity, remember, being interpreted literally now in the 21st century by fundamentalists? Well, the answer is a complex one, but can be partly understood with a 3-pronged approach. Fear of racism, geopolitical issues, and the misuse and misinterpretation of Islamic ideologies all begin to provide some explanation to all of this madness. So the fear of racism specifically comes from us in the West, and is a point further made by Ayaan Hirsi Ali. She states that because Westerners are choosing to ignore the connection between the violence of Islamic extremists and the religion itself, the internal repairs that need to be made within Islam can never stamp out extremism. We are too afraid to call out the nonsense of Islam at the fear of being branded a racist. Ayaan Hirsi Ali makes the point that Christianity here in the West is heavily criticised, to the point where its very similar fuckwittery is suppressed to a controllable point. Ali states that Islam needs a similar reform in order to prevent it falling into the hands of extremists. The geopolitical issues stem from the literal positioning of Islam itself. The geographical location of Islamic extremists and where they recruit from, the likes of Afghanistan, Pakistan and Syria, all feed into the expansion of these groups. These are countries in chaos, in violent turmoil, ravaged by war and that are systematically corrupt. The instability of these countries encourage the rise of extremist groups, who are vehemently blaming the West and governmental powers for their dire situation. As Georgetown University professor Haroon Ular says, these conditions make for a tempting offer from extremists, who promise change and the rise of a new order if its rules are followed. Rules that often encourage acts of violence to overthrow the enemy, and rules that are propped up by the misinterpretation of Islamic ideas. So that misuse and misinterpretation, well, what does that look like? Well, take the term jihad for instance, a term not only misused and misinterpreted by extremists, but one also bastardized by the press. The term jihad literally means struggle and can mean a struggle internally with our own demons or outwardly for the betterment of society. It has sometimes been interpreted as a struggle in the way of Allah. Essentially, to have a jihad is to have a goal, an achievement, or a struggle towards a personal positive outcome. To have a jihad is to strive to be a better Muslim or even a better person. This ideology of struggle has been taken by extremist groups who interpret jihad as an attack on the West to protect the sanctity of Islam. It is just one example of an outdated interpretation that is rife throughout Islamic extremism, and in some countries baked into their constitution itself. Sharia law, for instance, an abhorrent set of laws meant to control Muslim behaviour, is still adhered to in countries like Saudi Arabia. It is a law that determines public executions in the form of stoning as acceptable. A literal interpretation of a law that was written when people still thought the earth was flat and considered valid in today, in 2017. Madness. Fucking madness. All three of these issues, that fear of racism, those geopolitical issues, and the misinterpretation of Islam, all feed into one another. The fear of racism and of challenging Islam continues to allow the misinterpretation of its teachings, which leads to more violence. It continues to worsen the geopolitical situations of the countries in which Islam hails from. It's a crazy, confusing, and fucked up situation. One that has led us here, to today, where terrorist attacks are at their highest in over a decade. So what's there to do? Well, I can't provide that answer. I'm nowhere near intelligent enough to even begin contemplating what a solution to Islamic terrorism looks like. All I can do is offer up some insight, some regurgitated knowledge, in the hope that at least trying to understand what is happening here may open up the door to some possible solutions. Because you know what is killing us more than terrorism? Ignorance. Uninformed, ignorant opinions only worsen the situation right now, muddying the water and warping the perspective on something that needs a clear, level-headed approach. I've said this before over and over, but when it comes to matters of truth and opinion, challenge everything. Don't just take what you see, hear or read as fact. Scrutinise it, dismantle it, and try to find the realism in all the fantasy bullshit that surrounds us. Because it's that very lack of scrutiny towards Islam, and any other religion for that matter, that has led us here to some of the most sickening atrocities that the world has ever seen. God damn it! It took ages.